They're calling you a wartime criminal, the offenses you've done, the amount of, again, like I said earlier, they're calling it a genocide. How do you answer to the critics that they don't follow politics, they don't follow the stories closely? But if they see 120 something countries that if you land there, they're supposed to arrest you, the average person is going to say, maybe this isn't a good guy.
Patrick Bet-David had Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu on his podcast, and based on the comments the video got, PBD's facing a little bit of backlash. I'll let you read all that for yourselves, but you should watch the full interview. We'll include a link in the description box. And yes, I do work on a show under the umbrella of Patrick Bet-David's company. And so I do want to commend him because he lets me run my mouth as much as I want, especially on issues like Israel. And I'm going to do that right now. And so, you guys can weigh in on how you feel about how he conducted the interview. I'm more interested in debunking Netanyahu's just insane lies in the context of this interview. So why don't we do that, starting with this.
We've gone through the Holocaust, and I'm committed, as are my people, to prevent a second Holocaust that Iran was planning. And that's what we've been doing in this war. It's taken this long because we had to break this noose of death that Iran was going to put on us in their plans to conquer the Middle East, in their plans to then proceed to Europe, and in their plans to then proceed to America. They say death to America. We're just standing in their way. And boy, did we stand in their way. Israel is receiving and is very grateful for the American military assistance at about $3.8 billion a year. And 80% of it is spent in the United States. That's the deal. So it helps American industries. But we also produce these incredible weapons that we share with the United States. We produce intel that is invaluable for the United States.
There is a lot to debunk there, beginning with this notion that Iran wants to conquer the Middle East. I've noticed this trend with Netanyahu. Every time he makes an accusation, he throws an accusation against another country or a people's, right? Whether it's the people of Gaza, whether it's, Iran, he's usually accusing them of doing something that he wants to do. So just a quick reminder, he very recently told I-24 News, an Israeli publication, that he has like this religious connection to the Greater Israel Project. He wants to conquer the Middle East. That's what all this warring is really about. It's not about getting the hostages back, which is why they're annexing the West Bank as we speak, folks. Okay, there are no hostages in the West Bank. We all know that. They've been bombing Yemen. They've been bombing Lebanon. And these are recent bombings, by the way. Okay, so this has been going on because he wants Israel to dominate the Middle East, the Greater Israel Project. Look up the Clean Break memo, which was drafted by 3 neocons in the American government, handed over to Benjamin Netanyahu. Clean break from the Oslo Accords, from establishing peace with the Palestinians, from allowing for the formation of a Palestinian state. And in that memo, it's basically a blueprint that has played out exactly as the blueprint intended. So saying that Iran wants to dominate the Middle East is rich when Netanyahu and the Likud party literally have the Greater Israel Project in their charter. Okay. The other thing I'm noticing about Netanyahu's, media tour is he really tries to frame things in a way that would make Americans think, oh my gosh, we really need Israel. Without Israel, we'd be goners. We'd be goners. Israel's really protecting us from Iran. Except we're the ones who provide all the bombs, all the weapons. And let's not forget, it was the United States. It was the American military. It was American bombs that were utilized to strike Iran's nuclear sites, which could have led to a full-blown hot war, but because of Iran's restraint, It didn't lead to a bigger hot war. But you know what? Netanyahu's not satisfied. Israel's not satisfied. They want the US to go into Iran again. That story is developing as we speak. I'll probably cover it tomorrow. Israel's protecting America? Are you kidding me right now? What a joke. And then one other thing I just have to note. The military aid that we give Israel, the country that had an economic surplus in 2021, in the middle of a global pandemic, while the US is drowning in debt, Israel's enjoying a sweet little economic surplus. But we're shelling out a ton of money in military aid to Israel anyway. And he talks about how it's so good for America because 80% of that money goes toward buying American weapons. First of all, if that were true, oh wow, thanks Netanyahu. Tax dollars are being redirected from working class people to a tiny group of weapons contractors and manufacturers. How does that benefit ordinary Americans who can't afford housing, don't have health care or universal health care, that's for sure, who just had their Medicaid benefits cut? How exactly does that benefit the American people? But besides which, what he says isn't even true. Israel gets a special little loophole that all the other countries we give military aid to don't get to enjoy. While other countries have to use that military aid to buy American weapons, Israel can actually use that money to buy or manufacture its own weapons. Which is why I keep bringing up the point that our foreign policy toward Israel is essentially helping Israel build its empire using our soldiers and our money. So I hope you had a nice day at work today. A portion of your earnings are going to go toward building Israel's empire. Now, he also mentioned intel. Israel is an important ally to the United States because they provide us intel. The kind of intel that informs our government that Iraq is a big threat to the United States because they are harboring weapons of mass destruction, which of course they didn't have. And that preemptive war in 2003 was a complete and utter disaster. Not a single IDF soldier lost their lives. None of them were on the ground in Iraq, but we certainly lost a lot of soldiers. And we certainly spent a lot of money looking for weapons of mass destruction that didn't even exist. But hey, you know what? Israel got the regime change war in Iraq that Bibi so desperately wanted. Okay. And then there's the intel that they don't share with the United States. Now, Scott Horton, who's incredible, very well read, and I've learned a lot from him, talks about an important piece of intel that wasn't shared with the United States in the lead up to a bombing in Beirut. This was in the 1980s. Okay, so this was the 1983 Beirut bombing, which killed 241 Americans to be specific. They were all soldiers and 59 French troops as well. So here's Scott Horton talking about it on Piers Morgan's show.
In Viktor Ostrovsky's book, By Way of Deception, he says that the Mossad knew that Hezbollah, or I guess proto-Hezbollah at that time, was making a giant truck bomb and decided explicitly not to warn the Americans before the Beirut attack that killed 241 American Marines in 1983. I have to wonder if that's why Ronald Reagan went ahead and pulled out at that time instead of doubling down. It's because he knew of their treachery. That's again in the book, By Way of Deception. And it just goes to highlight the vast daylight and discrepancy between the interests of the nation state of Israel, which, as the gentleman said, of course, they're a very small nation state. It's in their interest, obviously, to get America to do what they want.
I'm a big fan of Scott Horton's, and I'm very excited that he will be joining us on TYT on September 5th. That's a Friday. He will be on a panel with myself and Dave Smith in the first hour, and we'll be talking about foreign policy. I'm obviously very excited about that. But what he mentions is the exact type of intel that would be helpful to the American people, to our soldiers, 241 of them who got killed in that bombing in Beirut. So when Netanyahu brings up how critical Israel is in sharing intel with the United States, it literally makes me feel sick to my stomach. And then get a load of this. He actually brought up the Beirut bombing while talking to PBD. Let's take a look.
Israel is different. It really is. We know that we have to fight for ourselves, and we do. But when we fight for ourselves, we fight for you too. Because we fight Iran. Iran tried to murder President Trump not once, but twice. Iran killed and wounded thousands of Americans with their IEDs, explosive devices, in Iraq and Afghanistan. Iran killed 241 Marines in Beirut. They bomb your embassies. They burn American flags. But if you look at who's actually fighting Iran, it's Israel. It's Israel, our brave soldiers.
No, this man makes me sick. He makes me sick, genuinely. USS Liberty, another Israeli attack, by the way, on one of our Navy ships in an effort to, frame Egypt and get the United States to invade Egypt. This stuff is sick. And so to hear him talk about how important Israel is to our safety here in the United States, not only is it a lie, it's an insult. Final thing that I need to bring up, because Israel does not officially recognize the Armenian Genocide. And to Patrick's credit, he did bring this up. Now, Netanyahu is the type of person who will say anything to anyone at any moment when it's convenient for him. I want to give you that warning ahead of time. And then I'll give you the receipts for why I think he's full of it. But take a look at this.
For anybody that doesn't recognize Armenian Assyrian genocide, if there's any country that I would have expected to be on the list that recognized the Armenian and the Assyrian and the Greek genocide, it would be Israel. Why haven't you yet recognized the Armenian, Assyrian, and the Greek genocide that the Turkish did to that community?
In fact, I think we have, because I think the Knesset passed a resolution to that effect.
I don't know if it's come from you, though. I don't know if it's come from the Prime Minister of Israel.
Yeah, I just did.
Okay.
Here you go.
All right. Well, thank you for doing that. Thank you for doing that. I appreciate you. That's important to me. And I'm sure a lot of Armenians, Assyrians, and Greeks around the world appreciate you saying that.
I'm not one of those Armenians. I don't appreciate anything about Netanyahu. I think that he is a disgusting war criminal. I think he's a brazen liar. And simply saying, I just did, in regard to recognizing the Armenian genocide when he hadn't. He had mentioned the Knesset passing a resolution. Okay, that's not you personally making a statement about how you recognize the Armenian genocide, the barbarism, the slaughter of 1.5 million Armenians. Nothing in there about that. I just did. Like, get off it, get off it. And the reason why I don't believe anything that comes out of Netanyahu's mouth, especially as it pertains to Armenia and the Armenians, is because of what Israel's been up to in regard to arming Armenia's enemies. So this is reported by the Times of Israel. Few have benefited more from the two countries' close relations, that means Israel and Azerbaijan, than Israeli military contractors. Experts estimate Israel supplied Azerbaijan with nearly 70% of its arsenal between 2016 and 2020, giving Azerbaijan an edge against Armenia and boosting Israel's large defense industry. Let me just remind you all that Azerbaijan used those Israeli weapons to ethnically cleanse 150,000 Armenians from Nagorno-Karabakh, and also used those weapons to invade Armenia. They're currently occupying Armenian land as we speak. I mean, Netanyahu would know a thing or two about occupation. He specializes in it. He's absolute scum. Israeli arms have played a very significant role in allowing the Azerbaijani army to reach its objectives, said Peter Wiesman, senior researcher at the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute, which tracks arms sales. So Netanyahu can take his "I just did" and shove it up his ass. He is not an advocate of the Armenian people. He's not an advocate for humanity. He's absolute scum. That's what I think about him. He's a war criminal. And I pray that the day will come where I get to see him in shackles imprisoned where he belongs. And until that day comes, I am not gonna listen to any of his lies and regurgitate them. He's a bad guy, and he deserves the worst.
Every time you ring the bell below, an angel gets his wings. Totally not true, but it does keep you updated on our live shows.